Alrighty, it appears that we are live now. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. G'day, you magnificent bitches and bastards. This is Jesse from Eureka 1901, and I hope that you're all very, very well on this day of thunder. Thursday, day of thunder, Norse Pantheon, etc. So we've all been through that before. We don't have to go through it again. So today's stream, I'm sorry I was slightly late. I was just going through, so I got a bit caught up with the research for this particular one, and yeah, I was just going through the notes. It's going to be a little bit more of a lengthy one than normal. I'm hoping to keep it at an hour. We'll see how we go. So I just want to say we've got 3 watching. Thank you very, very much for tuning in, and I'm just going to say quickly that if I don't get your comments straight up, I definitely will, and I'm very appreciative of anyone who tunes in and has a look at the time. So, yeah, today's stream. The title of today's stream is Day of Thunder, Vietnam, Boomer Lies and Commie Ties. And it's probably going to piss a lot of people off. So, I'm thinking we'll just get into it, eh? Hey, Joshua, good to see you here, buddy. Joshua Fawns, fantastic digger, fantastic bloke. Thank you so much for tuning in. So today's stream is about addressing some of the fallacies and some of the half-truths and outright lies that have been perpetuated about the Vietnam War, about what ended up happening with it, about essentially, I'm trying to say this in a way that I don't actually get banned, get my friend Dean McRae, who owns this channel, banned off of YouTube and Facebook, etc. So essentially, it's just addressing some of the fallacies surrounding the Vietnam War. Now, this is not going to be a Vietnam War apologetic stream or anything like that. It's not going to be whitewashing any of the bad stuff that happened or anything like that. It's nothing like that at all. It is just simply addressing some of the bullshit that we have actually been taught about it, and hopefully people get something out of it. So what I am basing this stream today off of is the primary and secondary sources within a book called Australia, the Vietnam War by an author called Paul Ham. Now, Paul Ham is a bit of a lefty himself, but having said that, he does a fantastic job in that book of outlining the entirety of the Vietnam War, including 3,000 years of Vietnamese history, which we're going to get into. And he does a pretty good job of staying objective, which is absolute hats off to Paul Ham. I don't think he's actually going to see this, but it's an excellent book. If I was dictator of Australia, I would make it mandatory reading for every high school student, to be perfectly honest, along with A Bastard of a Place by Peter Brune, along with, To Brook 1941 by Chester Wilmot, and other things as well. It's very illuminating. Now, this is not particularly well rehearsed. While I was trying to script this video the last 2 days, I ended up getting caught up in a lot of other things. People wanted to talk to me about a lot of stuff, etc. So I do apologize if it's not particularly well rehearsed, and I actually looked down a fair bit to my notes. Most of it is already up here anyway. I'm just trying to order my thoughts so that this actually flows. Now, I want to make another quick point here. This stream is not about boomer bashing, okay? I'm not here to bash the boomers. That's for another stream. Just joking, okay? I'm not here bashing baby boomers, okay? Why am I not here bashing baby boomers? Because who were the main participants in the Vietnam War? Who were the ones that either voluntarily or were conscripted into fighting the fucking thing? They were boomers. They were baby boomers. And they did an incredible job. Hey, good to see you too, Joshua. Thank you very much. So this is not a boomer bashing video. So for any of you who are boomers that are watching this or watch this later, I'm not here hanging shit on your generation, okay? Just wanted to get that one out of the way. Why am I doing this stream? This is one that's very, very close to my heart. I know a lot of Vietnam veterans. I've gotten on the piss with a lot of Vietnam veterans on Anzac days. I've volunteered for reunions. I've worked the bar for them, etc., like that. And what has gone down is absolutely horrific. And the half-truths and the outright lies surrounding what they were involved in is absolutely horrific. And just as a by-the-by, and I've already addressed this with my friend D.O.T. and other people as well. If you want a really, really good, accurate movie on Vietnam, there's one called Danger Close 2019, and it's about the Australian participation, 6RAR, Delta Company 6RAR in the Battle of Long Tan, 18th of August 1966, and it is a very, very good movie, very well done, and largely, according to what I've been told by the veterans who were actually there, quite accurate. It's actually a very good movie, and I would highly recommend it. The other reason I'm doing this stream. So in the 80s, when I was born, you had this belated, welcome home parade for our Vietnam veterans who had been spat on and who had been rejected and who had been, the odd angry shot is very good. That's true, Joshua. But yeah, these veterans who have been treated so badly and abandoned by the political class, who've been abandoned by the Australian public at large. And we're going to get into the aftermath of the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese conflict as well. But what happened to these guys is unforgivable. And you think doing one little fucking march and, it's about time and welcome home is going to fucking fix it, including the very people that were spitting on these guys. No, that's bullshit. And look, this is history, and this is long before my time. So I'm not trying to fix it in any way, shape, or form. It's unfucking fixable what happened. Having said that, it does make my blood boil when I do address it, because I know these guys. I know so many of these guys. And for example, he's not blood related, but so my father was fostered out to a Vietnam veteran. He ended up blowing his fucking head off. And that's not uncommon with him. And it's absolutely fucking horrific. Also, I wanted to point out as well that some veterans will disagree. Some Vietnam veterans will disagree with what I'm about to go through here today and the viewpoint that I'm coming from. And I understand it. I've heard it from Vietnam veterans before. Not many, but quite a few. For example, we shouldn't have even been there. It was just a civil war, etc. Well, we're going to get into that. The bigger picture matters. History matters. And that's where we're going to start, with history. Kaz, his dad's a Vietnam, but yeah, with Kaz, yeah, you're right. Yeah, he is. And by the way, in the odd chance that you might end up seeing this, Kaz, absolute respect, mate. Haven't seen you in fucking years, and I love your shit. You're in the Trenches podcast is awesome. I remember your earlier podcasts on Facebook, your lives on Facebook, man. Utmost respect. I don't know a digger from 2RA that doesn't respect you at all. So anyway, let's get into it. So before we get into Vietnamese history, a lot of people, including commies, don't even understand what communism is. So in order to understand the conflict, you need to understand communism. And it's really, really quite simple. And again, most don't understand it. Like most of these dickheads that were, roaming around in the 60s carrying Mao Zedong, Mao's Red Book, etc. They don't understand communism at all. They have no fucking idea. They haven't read the Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital or any of that kind of shit. And in all honesty, to understand, and I know reading's gone out of vogue these days, and reading has been out of vogue for a long time for a lot of people, probably for the last 60 years. But I'd highly recommend, so you read the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. I would recommend that you read What's Next by Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin was the leader of the Russian Revolution, and Stalin took over from him. I would highly recommend that you read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, which was written in the 60s at the same era of the Vietnam conflict, and that'll help you understand as well. And lastly, but not least, I would highly recommend that you read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And we're going to get onto Yuri Bezmenov later, but every KGB student studied Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And there's a fucking very good reason for that. Sun Tzu didn't win by necessarily military acumen or whatever. He won by subversion. The Art of War is basically a book on how to subvert your enemy to the point where you don't actually have to fire shots. You take them over without actually having to fire a shot at all, which is exactly what's happened to our society and our community. And we're going to get into that too, don't worry. Now, look, Marx and Engels, despite communist apologists, etc., saying, on balance, Mao is good for China, despite demociding tens of millions, over 50 million of his own people, Marx was very clear as to what communism entails. And it's basically the proletariat, the working class, rebelling against the bourgeoisie, wiping them out, making everyone equal, aka redistributing the wealth. And it's a world revolution. It's about world domination. It's about the entire world rising up, and anyone who owns shit basically gets wiped out, and everything gets equally distributed to everyone else. That's essentially what it is. And the funny thing is that you look at every communist regime in the world, including the one we're about to talk about, it's fat fuckers at the top and starving people at the bottom and a shit ton of democide. For those of you who don't understand the term democide, democide is where you kill your own people en masse. So it's not a genocide or anything like that. It's a democide. You are killing your own people en masse. And that's exactly what happens in these regimes. And again, the whole thing is about eliminating all private property, private ownership, personal sovereignty, etc., for the good of, the greater good of everybody else. Communism is essentially the direct opposite of anarcho-capitalism. The core center of the libertarian dogma. Yeah, Sun Tzu, fucking A, yeah. It's the direct opposite. So libertarians, the whole idea is that it's complete individual sovereignty. There is no collective at all. At the very core of it, at the hardcore anarcho-capitalist. Communism is the direct opposite. There is absolutely no individual whatsoever. Everything is for the state, for the collective, and there is no privacy, sovereignty, etc. whatsoever. So basically, communism is an atheistic, expansionist, totalitarian political ideology, and it is very infectious. And again, they use subversion to get their ends. Marx was largely influenced by Rousseau, by Kant, and by Hegel. And we are living the end stage right now of the Hegelian dialectic, which is essentially you create a problem, you gauge the reaction, then you pretend to be the solution. That's the simplest way to fucking put it, and that's exactly what we're living now. Also, a very strong part of communism is the idea of the kibbutz. So Karl Marx was and I can't say the word obviously on YouTube because I'm going to get banned. He was a little hat, small hat, although he was an atheist and violently anti any form of faith whatsoever. He was a secular humanist, a big believer in Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and a big believer in, what's the phrase that's escaping me right now? What is it? Social Darwinism. So you got COVID-19. Sorry to hear that, buddy. It's a slight flu, and I'm sure you'll recover perfectly fine. And then you have natural immunity, and you don't have to get any of these bullshit shots either. So, Joshua, that's a bit of a silver lining for you there, buddy. But yeah, anyway, so basically, it's the idea of a kibbutz on a large scale. So a kibbutz is, so in Israel, basically, if you have a child you can't take care of or whatever, it's essentially kind of like an orphanage. You send them there, and everyone works. Everyone gets the same. Everyone gets the same share of the food. Everyone grows the food. It's kind of like a commune, hence the word communism. That's basically where it comes from. Now, with communism, so this is, you've got to think back then. You've got to think of the actual, fuck the historiography bullshit, okay? Historiography is looking at history with a modern lens, through a lens of today. And that's a really bad way to look at it. You've got to look at it at the time. So at the time of the Vietnamese conflict, the Vietnam War, you got to think about it. Like Russia had succumbed to communism. It had been taken over by Lenin and co., and they became the first communist state. It was horrific, and I'm sure that a lot of you actually realized that, the murder of the kulaks, the Ukraine was devastated, the mass collectivization, the mass poverty, the mass starvation, being exiled, sent to gulags, being lined up against ditches and shot. It was absolutely fucking horrific. And then China, and we'll go into the China hands later on. So China, Mao Zedong took over China. Great leap forward, 20 million died. Then you had the next leap forward, another 20 million died. Most of them starved to death slowly. But apparently Mao's good on balance because he bought China out of serfdom. Well, I'm sure a lot of those serfs would have loved to have been alive in serfs rather than slowly friggin' starved to death, eating bark, eating fucking onion peels when they could find it, and watching their kids starve to death. It's horrific. And then you had both Russia and China funding and supporting and arming these communist insurgencies all throughout the world. And they were running schools in China and in Russia to train these communists in order to in insurgency tactics, etc., like that, to go back to their own home countries and start communist insurgencies to take over and basically make the entire world a communist utopia where no one owns anything. And let's see if this sounds familiar with you who are familiar with the Great Reset, where no one owns everything and everybody's happy. You will own nothing and you will be happy. It's not a new idea. The Great Reset's not a new idea at all. Communism is essentially, the EU/UN/New World Order. It's just the proto version of that. That's essentially what it is. And people were right to be scared. And yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm hearing you. And look, yeah, I know that, some of the more conservative / right wing / whatnot, the governments and everything were pushing a little bit too hard and whatnot back in the day, which is one of the reasons that the boomers ended up kicking back against it a little bit. That's one of the reasons, and I understand it. However, it's a really insidious, really horrific. Sorry, I just dropped something on my foot. Really insidious, really horrific, and absolutely murderous state of affairs when it comes to communism. And there was a very good reason that so much of the world was fucking scared. World War II had been won. 2 totalitarian ideologies have been absolutely fucking crushed. And then you've got this third ideology that came out, and it's just taken over country after country after country after country after country. And people were scared, and understandably so. You also had a lot of homegrown communists. So in Australia, for example, you had Menzies, the Prime Minister. He ended up bringing out a bill that was passed by both the lower and upper house to ban the Communist Party of Australia, which was largely made up of unionists and university students. And while that is highly illiberal and while that is highly undemocratic, understandably so, because when it comes to communism, there is no liberal, there is no democratic. It's you do what you're fucking told. If you're even accused of being anti-communist, if you're even accused of not being part of the ideology, you get sent off to a gulag or you're fucking murdered. That got shot down by the High Court, so the Communist Party was allowed to continue to exist, and then later on they changed their name to the Greens. That's essentially what happened. But so you got a lot of homegrown communists as well. And it starts with subversion. So I would highly recommend that you check out Stefan Molyneux's The Truth About Joe McCarthy and Modern Parallels. You can find it on BitChute. You used to be able to find it on YouTube, but you should be able to find it on BitChute now. Joe McCarthy's not the monster he was made out to be. In fact, he was actually a very, very decent guy who protected the rights of those he was investigating. And the Venona papers that were released in the early 90s proved McCarthy right about the level of subversion in the US government and how far they'd actually gone. And it was absolutely horrific. And I'd also highly recommend that you check out Stefan Molyneux's video on The Truth About South Africa regarding Mandela, etc. Like, Mandela was a communist terrorist. And what has happened to South Africa since the end of apartheid, it went from the only decent kind of first world country on the African continent to a fucking shithole. And you find this again and again and again. Also, later on, this is post-Vietnam, but Yuri Bezmenov. Yuri Bezmenov was a KGB defector who tried to warn the West in the early 80s, and the West didn't bloody listen. And we're borderline commie ourselves now as well, so I'd highly recommend checking that out. Yuri Bezmenov, just put it into YouTube and have a look, in all honesty. So I mentioned a little bit before about the China hands and the US being subverted. So what happened in China? So China, the US sponsored Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was a Chinese nationalist, as were all of his followers, and they wanted to unite China, or at least a part of China, to be for China underneath the nationalist banner. And then you have Mao Zedong, who was a communist and wanted to institute a USSR-style thing in China. The US started off backing Chiang Kai-shek. There were Soviet agents within the US government who were actually deployed into China to report back to Washington. One of their names was John Service. And they reported back that actually Chiang Kai-shek's an absolute horrifically bad totalitarian bastard, and Mao Zedong is a democratic, nationalist kind of guy. And he's really, really good. He'll do Windows, he'll do all this kind of shit. He's really, really great. So the US switched their allegiance from Chiang Kai-shek to Mao Zedong, which is why he ended up taking over China. and genociding over 50 million of his own people, on top of invading numerous countries and supporting communist insurgencies in numerous countries. And the Korean War was a direct result of that. And this is the thing. Hold on a second. MIDI, fuckbots, VORNGO. I don't know why the hell you guys keep putting up acronyms I don't understand, but whatever, mate. Hope you're well. This is a meeting I'll be going over a lot. It's already awesome. Love you, bro. Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. But yeah, it's the US government was the most heavily infiltrated by Soviet agents in history. They couldn't get anywhere near as far as with Britain or any other of the democracies, etc. And it was put on hold during World War II because we found ourselves allied, our side. We ended up finding ourselves allied with Stalin. So his sleepers, his Soviet agency said, righto, don't do any more subversion in the governments, in the home governments of these countries. We're allies now. So just fucking put it to rest. We'll get into it after the war. War was won, went back to subverting, and that's how China came under communist rule, and that's how a lot of these other things happen, including a lot of the fuck ups with the counterinsurgency wars that we fought since World War II. It's amazing that Korea actually ended up in a state where South Korea still exists, because every other thing that has been touched, every other conflict that's been touched has been a massive fuck up, and largely due to subversion within the US government itself. Not to mention the deep state, but that's another one for another time. So the domino theory. Domino theory is one of the biggest ones that is bashed. The fact is it was correct. For example, so Australia was involved with Malaya and Borneo before Vietnam. You had these communist takeovers happening in Indonesia and in Malaya. And they were vicious and they were brutal, and a lot of people died. And so Australia actually stepped in Malaya with the British and stopped it. And didn't really go too well, obviously, with the aftermath, because Indonesia went to, I can't really say the I word, but a Mohammedan regime. Malaya did as well. Having said that, it was everywhere. It was everywhere. Basically, what the USSR and what China were doing was saying to anybody, hey, come to our schools, embrace Marxism. We will train you up. We will supply you with weapons, arms. We will supply you with money. We will supply you with all of this stuff so you can make other communist utopias everywhere all over the world. And that's what was happening. That was what was happening. And the domino theory was correct. One country would fall, then another would fall, then another would fall, then another would fall, to the point where at one stage, a quarter of the world's population was under communist rule. And there was more insurgencies popping up everywhere. People were scared for a fucking reason. And Australia adopted the concept of forward defense. So that's why we involved ourselves in Borneo and Malaya and later Vietnam. It's like better to fight them over there than fight them here. Not too different to World War I or World War II. It's like, okay, we've got our protector. We've got to do what they want us to do, because they're our insurance, the premium paid is that we participate in their wars. I've already been over this many, many times. We can't protect ourselves, but also better to fight them over there than here. Better to have other bloodshed than Australian blood on Australian soil, which is how we adopted the whole idea of forward defense. And again, this led to Korea, Vietnam, Malaya, Borneo. And part of the reason that the USA ended up becoming so imperialist in the first place was, so General Patton in World War II, after Germany had capitulated, he said we should keep going and take out the USSR because they're going to be a big, big problem worldwide. And he was correct. And one of the reasons the USA became so imperialist, even though there were so many within the government and the deep state, whatever, that were subverted by the Soviets, was, okay, we've got this massive world-spanning problem that is actively trying to subvert everyone and take over, so we've got to do something about it. So that's just, I went into that a little bit, and I know we're already at 24 minutes, and this is going to take a while, but that's just a little bit of an indication for you guys, because what the boomers teach and had taught us all was that, and I'm not encapsulating all boomers there, I'm just saying the boomers that are in education, etc., they've all taught us that, oh, there was never any scare. Joe McCarthy was Reds under the bed. It was a witch hunt. It was this. It was that. You had innocent people getting fucking, bamboozled and stymied, and their reputations put in tatters, etc. That's what the communists actually do. But yeah, McCarthy didn't do any of that, and the threat was incredibly real, and it still kind of is somewhat to these days. Just we don't see it very well because we have gone so far to that side these days that we can't even bloody see what's happening. And our own countries in the West are an absolute mess, and a lot of it is due to communism / neo-Marxism being postmodernism. But that's for another time. We're addressing Vietnam now. So I wanted to go into a little bit about communism before we go into Vietnamese history, because both of them play into this conflict and the lies and the half-truths, etc., surrounding it. So going to Vietnamese history. So Vietnamese history, there's about 3,000 years of recorded Vietnamese history. Sorry, I've got to hydrate. Give me a second. Joshua Fawn says, you still got a nuclear bomb, that's Stalin. That's perfect, because I just learned something. My new granddad and great-grandfather from Signals, we're very proud, love you. Oh, thanks, bro. Thanks, Digger, really appreciate it, mate. So we're going to the history of Vietnam, because this one is actually very poignant as well. And this is where one of the big fallacies and lies comes from, which we're going to get into about the Vietnam conflict. So there's 3,000 years again. There's 3,000 years of Vietnamese history that's recorded, and it is a very tortured history. So very, very rich in rice and natural resources, etc., constantly getting invaded, constantly fighting invaders out. So Vietnam essentially started as a nation in the Red River Delta, which is in North Vietnam, and based around Hanoi, which is the North Vietnamese capital. And it was essentially pagan tribes, a collection of different pagan tribes. And Vietnam was essentially formed. So Vietnam essentially means land of the Viets. Viet is the people, Nam is, or Nam is land, Vietnam. And you'll notice that a lot of Vietnam veterans, they pronounce it, they don't say Vietnam, they say Vietnam. I'm probably saying that incorrectly, but they say it in a very particular way. And Vietnam was formed in the 3rd century AD. So, 200 something AD. Later on, this included the Mekong Delta in the south, based around the land around Saigon, which was the southern capital. Excuse me. And in 1426, General Le Loi, who was the founder of the Lei dynasty, he kicked out the Chinese, and we're going to get into that as well. But and from there, that was kind of the golden age of Vietnam, and that's where you had a lot of public works, etc. And that was where the Vietnamese, like they ended up with their written language called Nom. They ended up with their Confucian style of living. Basically, villages were very autonomous. You had basically the whole core of the Vietnamese personality, the Vietnamese identity was kind of formed then. And the first dynasty was the Lei dynasty. And it was kind of like the golden age of Vietnam. It was very, very rich country. People got along very, very well. The whole of the Vietnamese peninsula was united, and it was very strong. And every time someone invaded it, they got fucked up bad. They even repelled 3 invasions from the Mongols. So Kublai Khan invaded Vietnam 3 times, and 3 times the Vietnamese kicked him out. And the Mongols were very hard to defeat. If you look into the history of the Mongolian Empire from Genghis Khan onwards, Kublai was his grandson. They were very hard to defeat, and in fact, often didn't get defeated at all. They were considered basically invincible, and the Vietnamese kicked the shit out of them 3 times. So very martial race. So overall, Vietnam was independent for 900 years. Now, both before and after this, you had occupation. So you had 1,000 years of Chinese occupation, and you had 80 years of French occupation, not to mention the Japanese occupation during World War II, etc. And this kind of developed an underdog complex with the Vietnamese. It's like, I'm the underdog, but I'm still going to fight you tooth and nail. And it doesn't matter how many of my people that I lose, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to get you out of my country. And this exists to this day somewhat. And this is something that Ho Chi Minh, etc., harnessed, which we're going to get into. But it developed a bit of an underdog complex. And just picture this. Your country is occupied for 1,000 years, and you have a power that is trying to wipe out your own identity, etc., for 1,000 years, and you still survive. I think the only thing comparable to that, to my mind, was the Spanish with the Islamic invasions. Hello, Josie Ingram. God bless you, sis. It is really, really good to see you here, my sister in Christ. Thank you. The Islamic invasion in Spain, and it took them 700 years to kick them out. I mean, that's a long time to bloody fight. And the Vietnamese were fighting for 1,000 years before they finally kicked the Chinese out. Like, so this is the kind of people that we're talking about. Like, they're very, very underdog complex, and they're not afraid to fight, no matter what the odds against them. So the only thing that the Vietnamese really took from China was the idea of Confucianism. So I don't know a great deal about it, but it's essentially, there's a great deal of personal autonomy. You basically pay homage to your emperor, etc. Having said that, you're largely left autonomous, and the edicts of the emperor end at the end of the village is essentially what it means. And it was a very rich society, very, very advanced society. Now, one of the big fallacies when it comes to Vietnamese history, and this is what we were taught in school, so in history class. So Vietnam, like Korea, was split for the first time after World War II. No. Korea wasn't split for the first time either. In fact, North and South actually had a bit of a different flavor to it after a while. Because the first split in Vietnam, the first North-South split in Vietnam happened in 1545. You ended up with kind of like the collapse of Rome kind of thing. So, or if you read the Bible, the split between Israel and Judea. Essentially what happened was you had internal struggles, you had different factions fighting, etc. And Vietnam split into essentially along the 17th parallel, where it was later split up after World War II. And it remained this way except for about 30 years. So what you ended up with was what was called Cochin China, and you had Tonkin. Tonkin was the north, Cochin China to the south, and they were ruled separately, except for there was one brief reunification. So Vietnam was split for centuries before the Vietnam War, or sorry, I should say before the French occupation. And this split, it remained a wound that wasn't healed, and actually even post 75 is still not healed somewhat, because there are still actually large differences between those that live in the north and south, and there's still cultural differences, and there's still all kinds of shit in there. But essentially, the first split in 1545, that took a sword cut right through the heart of Vietnam, and it was never healed. Anyway, just like in Korea, the North Vietnamese had a hell of a lot more Chinese influence and Chinese blood, whereas the South Vietnamese, they had a bit more of the Khmer, Cambodian, Thai kind of blood, as well as obviously the Viet. So they developed a little bit different cultures, a little bit different outlook, etc. And that still kind of remains today. And that's where the two Vietnams, the seeds for the two Vietnams were planted. Now, the French invaded in 1858 and eventually took over the entirety of Vietnam and raped the living shit out of it. If you want to look for, yeah, well, neither did I until I read into it, mate. I knew what I was taught until I actually started reading it, Joshua. And Joshua says, I didn't know it went back that far, 1500s. Well, it does. And this is why I insist on my son reading history. No history, and the future becomes a hell of a lot less unpredictable. So anyway, the worst, probably some of the worst that you can see outside of the Germans in World War II or the Japanese in World War II when it comes to colonialism is the French. So the French took over in 1858. They invaded in 1858. They took over the rest of Vietnam a little bit later and basically raped the living shit out of it. And it was all French rule. The Vietnamese were the monopolies that were created and everything like that destroyed the Vietnamese. And there was nationalistic after nationalistic after nationalist. There was nationalist movement after nationalist movement, rebellion after rebellion after rebellion, and the French crushed everyone. There was one particular massacre at a place called Haiphong where the French killed 10,000 civilians in one hit. And it was horrific. It was absolutely horrifically bad what the French did in Vietnam. And I can definitely understand, like, there's no apologetics for that. There's no real apologists for that. And this is evidenced by the fact that after the French were kicked out of Vietnam, they kept no French institutions whatsoever. So if you compare British colonialism and French colonialism, most of the places where the British colonized, and then later on post-colonial were given their independence, they kept a lot of British institutions. They kept cricket, they kept independent judiciary, they kept a lot of the same kind of institutions that were British. India is a good example of that. Malaya is a good example of that, or Malaysia, I should say. Singapore, a lot of these places, they kept the British institutions. The Vietnamese kept none, because what they had seen to the French was so fucking horrific. It was really bad. And yeah, so, but the nationalist causes were always defeated. And their leaders were always either exiled or captured and guillotined. And the guillotine, by the way, was used in Vietnam up until the 1960s by the Vietnamese themselves. So this is after the French left, which we're going to get into, after the French were defeated. So we're going to get into a guy. His name was Nguyen Sinh Cung, and he was born in 1890. And you'll know him by his more modern name a little bit later on. And like his right-hand man called Giap, his family was severely persecuted. He had family members that were locked up, family members that were executed, family members that were by the French. And he developed an absolutely visceral hatred of the French. And he was a nationalist back in the day. At that time, he was a nationalist. He loved Vietnam. He wanted to see Vietnam freed, and he was with the nationalist cause. And there was another cadre of nationalists that came up. They ended up being hunted down by the French and killed off, and the Vietnamese collaborators working for the French. Their leader was exiled. And he petitioned Woodrow Wilson in 1919 after World War I, saying, look, I hope this is a new era. I hope that people have the right to self-determination, as with what happened in America. Can you please recognize Vietnam as an independent country that should be free of French colonial rule? He was ignored by Wilson. And Wilson died in 1919 anyway. He was already a sick man. Then Cung, he discovered Marx, and he co-founded the French Communist Party in 1919 in France with fellow Vietnamese exiles, and also a lot of French people who had discovered Marx and loved Marx. They read the Communist Manifesto, they read Das Kapital, and they were fully into it. It's like, yeah, let's overthrow these bourgeoisie assholes, these bougie assholes, and let's take over. Let's get rid of the ownership of means of production. Let's get rid of private property, and let's start this world revolution for the underdog. Hence why I mentioned the underdog in Vietnamese history. For the underdog to take over, for the underdog to rule, where everything's fair and free, etc. And this took hold in his mind and overtook his nationalism. He met Stalin in 1924, and he even trained in China in a Chinese camp for training insurgents to go out and start communist insurgencies. And then at a soccer game in Hong Kong, he and a few other Vietnamese formed the Indochina Communist Party. There's just a few of them gathered around, gathered into the actual football game itself in the crowd, and they founded the Indochina Communist Party in 1929. Later on, founded the Viet Minh. The Viet Minh was the army that ended up defeating the French. And they were very careful. So he and Giap were both very, very fervent Marxists, very, very fervent communists, but they were very careful because there were so many factions within the Vietnamese community to not paint it, to not hit the Marxist dogma too much, to not ram it down people's throats too much. So they presented themselves as nationalists and let the Marxist shit out of it. And they formed the Viet Minh, and the Viet Minh was a very Spartan, very tough army, very used to living off the land. They also did some horrific shit to win. So the amount of Vietnamese that they actually killed, terrorized, raped, bashed, stole off of, etc. But in the end, they actually won. They defeated the French. Obviously, you had the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. And the French were defeated. And it wasn't the thing is as well, in Dien Bien Phu, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, there wasn't actually a lot of French fighting. There were a few French troops in there, including the French Foreign Legion and paratroops, etc. But a lot of them were German and actually Vietnamese collaborators, which is an interesting one. Yeah, Theo Acivitas, you're right, Ho Chi Minh. This is who I'm talking about, Ho Chi Minh. So he later named himself Ho Chi Minh. His original name was Nguyen Sinh Kung, and he actually had a lot of names throughout his life. But later he called himself Ho Chi Minh. So anyway, that ended up happening. So 54, Battle of Dien Bien Phu, 55, the negotiations, etc. Vietnam was split again into two. You had the South and the North. Bao Dai, who was the nominal Vietnamese emperor, ended up becoming Ho Chi Minh's advisor and actually prostrated himself before Ho Chi Minh, etc. And he became one of his chief advisors. So Ho and Giap ruled the North, and you had a guy called Diem who ruled the South. Now, there were elections that were supposed to happen in 1956 in order to decide the unification of the country, which scared the shit out of the South because the South had a lot less population than the North, so that didn't end up happening. In the meantime, 55 to 56, Ho and Giap killed tens of thousands, just like Stalin, just like Lenin, just like later on with Castro and Che Guevara, etc. They ended up killing tens and tens of thousands, so many of their own people who were suspected of being, kulaks. Anyone who owned a plow, anyone who owned a mule, anyone who owned a horse, a buffalo. Basically anyone who wasn't dirt friggin' poor and homeless had their shit robbed from them, and they were exiled, imprisoned, or outright killed, their shit taken and redistributed. And as a testament to this, 860,000 people fled North Vietnam for the South. Many of them were Catholic, but a lot of them were Buddhist as well. They fled the tyranny of communism. A lot of them were actually part of the Viet Minh. A lot of them supported Ho Chi Minh and Giap in the fight against the French, and they found themselves persecuted, so they fled south to Diem's regime. Now, Diem was corrupt, and no one can paint a picture saying he was a good guy at all. Like, he was a thug, he was a dictator, he was autocratic, he was totalitarian. He wasn't cool. Having said that, the Vietnamese had known nothing but totalitarianism really for a very, very long time. Totalitarianism is the wrong word. Authoritarianism, yes, but the Confucius style of authoritarianism allows a little bit more, personal autonomy. But Diem was a piece of shit. However, that doesn't detract from the fact that the South Vietnamese did not want to unite with the North. They didn't want anything to do with communism at all, except for the VC, the Viet Cong, and we're going to get into that. The vast majority of the South Vietnamese wanted nothing to do with Ho Chi Minh and wanted nothing to do with Giap. They were thankful for kicking the French out, but once the Marxist, Leninist dogma came out, they're like, fuck that, want nothing to do with that. We want to return to what we used to have. We're peasants living off the land with our own plots. The edicts of those who are in power they stop at the end of the village, and we want to be left the fuck alone to live as we have always lived, which is the complete opposite of what Ho Chi Minh and Giap were doing. Yeah, no worries, Josie. Thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you very much, Joshua. I appreciate that, brother. So, long story short, that was part of the agreement between the North and South, is that whoever wanted to go and live in the other spot can go and live, and that's exactly what happened. There weren't very many going from south to north, but there were a shit ton. 860,000 went from north to south. So after 56, the elections didn't happen. Ho was absolutely fucking furious, so he activated the sleeper cells, the Viet Cong, the communist insurgents that were South Vietnamese in South Vietnam, and that's where the terror began. And they started terrorizing the fuck out of the villages, rapes and murders and torture, etc. And this is something that is actually lost on a lot of Burma civilians, and something that is lost today because of what we've been taught by those who are part of the boomers who actually educated us. They've lost that. That seems lost on them, because the way that a lot of them look at this is that, it was just simply the imperialist South, which didn't want it. They wanted a unified. It was just a civil war, and they wanted a unified Vietnam, etc. That's completely bullshit. And the South Vietnamese would rather DM over them, and later on his latest successors, than be under fucking Ho Chi Minh with his communist bullshit and what happened in the North, where tens of thousands of people are being killed and killed on a mass scale and sent into gulags and exiled. They'd rather that under diem than actually suffering under that. So sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. So yeah, this is something that was lost on a lot of the boomers at the time. So we're going to go quickly into the boomers, and I'm not going to go into depth about this because, and you know, Josie, the lovely lady that was here, she's a boomer, and we've actually had a lot of conversations on boomers. So, and again, this is not boomer bashing. What I'm doing now is not boomer bashing. Again, boomers fought the Vietnam War, and most boomers that I know, like Josie, are absolutely incredible people. They tend to be more conservative. They tend to be right thinking. They tend to be quite patriotic, etc. So I'm not bashing boomers here, but there are a large minority of boomers who follow, who match the following description. So anyone who understands communism has heard of the long, slow march through the institutions, which was instituted by Stalin and later Mao. So it's subverting nations that they want to subvert to communism. So you take control of media, you take control of schooling, you take control of all the major institutions, all the major megaphones. The Nazis did the same thing. The fascists did the same thing. And just by the way, fascism and communism are on the same side of politics, motherfuckers. But that's a story for another time. So look, the long march through institutions. So you take control of the megaphones of the society, and then that way you can indoctrinate people, the young. You're after the young. You're after the young people, the females and then the young, to indoctrinate them into your way of thinking. Therefore, when they grow up and they actually get the age to vote and they get the age where they can influence stuff, then you subvert the country that you're after subverting. And this is exactly what happened. So the boomers were the product of affluence, the largest and richest generation in history at that time. University attendance was far above average. This is where a lot of the social justice-y kind of stuff started coming in. And they were kind of spoiled compared to previous generations and started thinking about shit outside their own survival and essentially causes that were nothing to do with them. This is where teenage rebellion started becoming a thing. This is and popularized. This is where basically they turned around and told the silent generation, their parents who had won World War II. And again, not all, and not even most. I'm saying a large minority to go fuck themselves. Heterosexual degeneracy started up, and like just the free love and the drugs and all that kind of shit. This is where it went wrong. And this is where the idea of social justice, etc. So fighting for causes that aren't your own, being zealots of lost causes, etc. And interfering in foreign matters that have nothing to do with them, of which South Africa is a very good example, and destroyed South Africa. A lot of Australian boomers were protesting South Africa, etc. Brought about the end of apartheid, put Mandela, who is a murdering fucking terrorist fucking commie, in charge, and the country has gone to complete shit. And a lot of black South Africans are suffering very badly from that. And also, again, so with the boomers, there's a lot of mass university and mass union membership, and unions have always been Marxist, very, very Marxist, and they still are to this day. And university, like I said, long, slow march through the institutions. The universities were taken over by professors who were all fucking Marxists and postmodernists, and this was passed on to the boomer students, hence all the mass protests and shit later on. So that's kind of the background. You know, we've gone through communism, we've gone through Vietnamese history, and we've gone through what happened with the boomers thus far. So I'm sorry this is taking a while. We're already at 48. I'm trying to keep it under an hour. I'm doing my best, but that's not going to happen. So anyway, that's the bulk of it out of the way anyway. I like to get the background, and this is why I try to give a bit of a different spin on things and mostly an historical spin, because, again, when you know history, the future becomes a hell of a lot more predictable, which makes it more boring, but less surprising. And you just find yourself being able to prepare a lot better. That's why I went into the history extensively of not extensively, but just touching on the dot points when it comes to communism in Vietnam itself. And now, again, the boomers, I only touched on it. I'm going to do another live stream on that at another time. And again, not boomer bashing people, so I don't want to hear any of that shit fucking directed at me. Righto, so during the war itself and the lead up to the war. So we've already talked about, the French got kicked out. You had the North and your South. You were supposed to have the elections, etc., like that. They didn't happen because the South was shit scared. The North outnumbered the South by a large degree, and Ho was fucking furious. And he wanted to reunify, even though it hadn't been unified since the 1500s, since the 14th century, Vietnam under Marxist-Leninist rule. So the USA started giving South Vietnam aid from 1962, as did we. We sent the Dirty 30, the AATTV, Australian Army Training Team Vietnam. Joshua Fawns, all the time you want. Thanks, man. Can we do a Papua New Guinea stream? I assume you're talking about West Papua, and fucking oath, we will definitely do that at some stage, brother. So, again, USA and ourselves were giving aid from 62. And then you had the Tonkin Gulf incident. So you had the USS Maddox that was reported being fired on by the North Vietnamese, which turned out to be a complete fucking hoax, and it was bullshit. Yes, the USA was looking for an excuse to go into Vietnam without violating international law. This is something that's played on by those who, and this is the majority, this is something that's played on, but Vietnam War was immoral and it was wrong, etc., etc., etc. The US was warmongering and trying to get in. That is true. Having said that, we went through the domino theory. We went through what communism actually is and what the goal of communism is. Yes, they were looking for an excuse to get in. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, something popped up on the radar that wasn't actually an attack. They gone, fuck it, we've been attacked. So in 1964, you had the Tonkin Resolution passed and the Marines landed at Da Nang, and then you had the start of US involvement in Vietnam with masses of troops and also a small training team of Australians. So for Australia, 1965, 1RR deployed to Vietnam as basically, so I've explained before as well, regular Australian infantry for a very long time have been considered the equivalent of the US Army Rangers. So essentially the US Army used 1RAR in a ranger capacity in Vietnam during 1965. Now, these boys in 1RAR had already been to Malaya. A lot of them, they were veterans of jungle warfare, they were veterans of counterinsurgency, and they were fucking dismayed at how the war was being run, the way that, you know, the big unit mentality of the American hierarchy, etc. Having said that, Australia had no influence on the overall direction of the war, just like we haven't had overall direction of any war we've been involved in, because, again, we're small fish. We have a protector, used to be UK, now it's America. And that's our insurance policy. The premium that's paid on that insurance policy is that we participate in their wars, and we don't get a great deal of say in the overall strategy. So it didn't really go well. You know, the Yanks and our boys didn't mesh very well. So our higher command's gone to the Americans, right? We want our own province with our own autonomous AO, area of operations, where we can operate as we do and where we can actually do our job the way that we do it. Because we've done Borneo, we've done Malaya, we know actually how to do this. So eventually, Diem actually wanted the Australians deployed to Quang Tri, and I'm not mispronouncing that, Quang Tri. And the reason that he did that, because he's like, if I get an Australian battalion massacred up there, then there'll be a hell of a lot more support from Australia. The region that was chosen, the province that was chosen, was Phuoc Toi. And the reason being is that it suited the Australians down to a T as to how to deploy, the area that it was in, and what was required to actually happen. And so from late 1965, 1RAR started building the base called Nui Dat at Lascombe Bowl in Phuoc Toi, and 6RAR deployed in 1966, and then obviously continued building the base. So the NVA and the Viet Cong actually wanted to test the Aussies out, and they did. They mortared Nui Dat on the night of the the night of the 17th or 16th, I think it was, of August 1966. There was a patrol sent out after the RD replied, smashed the mortars team, and then Delta Company was deployed. They ended up running into the Vietnamese, the VC and the NVA, etc., in a rubber plantation at Long Tan. And I would highly recommend to everybody, honestly, everybody, again, watch Danger Close, 2019, the Australian movie, Danger Close, Battle of Long Tan. It's a very good movie, a very short movie, very informative, very well done, and largely accurate, according to the veterans that I sat down and I got on the piss with, and the stories that they told me about that particular battle. So not just Delta, but also the other companies in 6RAR at the time. Anyway, long story short, 108 men faced 2,500 Viet Cong and NVA, kicked the living fuck out of them. 18 of our blokes died. Over 400 of them died, and after that, they did not risk facing Australians in open conflict like that again, not in a major attack. So afterwards, it was more the typical counterinsurgency, a lot of ambushes, a lot of this, that, and the other. But open battle was avoided after that. And Fort Toy went well. Like the way the Australians ran it, the way our boys ran it, went very, very well. And overall, the Vietnamese in Fort Toy came over to our side. They wouldn't cooperate with the VC. They started giving us a lot more intelligence. We were helping them build villages. We were helping with sanitation, giving them med caps, tent caps, etc. Everything actually went quite well, and it was well run. It's not unlike Oruzgan in Afghanistan. Oruzgan ended up being, that was the Australian province in Afghanistan, and ended up being the best run in the entire fucking war. So, in other words, the boys did their fucking job and did it fucking well, unlike the politicians and the public at large, etc. But we'll get into that later. Basically, the war in Phuoc Toi was won until the Tet Offensive of '68. And so the Tet, for those of you who don't know, Tet is a Vietnamese and Buddhist holiday where you basically gather in. It's a bit like the Japanese Au Bon. So family come home together, they celebrate, they worship ancestors, you do all that kind of stuff. So Tet, again, the communists are atheistic. They're not Buddhist. They don't give a shit about any kind of religiosity, spirituality, faith, etc. So they attacked on Tet for a reason. And there was historical precedent for that. A previous Vietnamese general did it back in the Middle Ages to the Chinese. The Chinese also observed Tet and fucking massacred them. So, and this was in 1968. And this caused a shock to the Western world because it's like, okay, I thought the fucking war was won. We've already been at war now for 6 years. And here they are. They're able to attack at a whim and take over. Was there tunnels at this point? Yeah, the Viet Minh used tunnels against the French, and then they were re-excavated against the Americans and Australians as well. The Chi complex, etc. But not stupid question, man. The only stupid question is one not asked. So anyway, where was I? Lost my train of thought. Thanks, Joshua. Just joking. I should be able to keep it. So anyway, long story short, it was actually going quite well. And then the attack with Tet, that's right. So the attack with Tet, it shocked the world. I thought we were winning this war, etc. And this is where support for the war started to crumble. So just like Iraq, just like Afghanistan, etc., support for the war was very, very strong. And then Tet hit, people start throwing up their hands. And obviously, you got, we're going to get into the rest of it as well. Obviously, there's a very strong Marxist undercurrent within Western democracies, especially in Australia, New Zealand, and America, which were they called themselves the anti-war movement. They were not anti-war at all. They were pro the communists winning because they were communists themselves, or at least very communist sympathetic themselves. Anyway, so it was the first. Hold on, before we get onto that. So one of the big ones when it comes to, we're getting onto the anti-war part now. So, well, anti-war, the pro-Viet Cong, pro-communist part. One of the big ones that fucked the whole thing in the ass, outside of the overall strategy of the American-led war, which was fucking absolutely horrific, and I have no doubt the subversion was part of that. But one of the big things that really fucked the whole cause over was conscription for service in Vietnam. Now, I was a soldier, I was infantry, and I hold to the Australian tradition of the referendum in World War I, which was defeated twice, that Billy Hughes tried to bring in for conscription for World War I. Menzies kind of got around it because Papua New Guinea was an Australian mandate, mandated territory in World War II, so he got away with sending militiamen who were conscripted over to Papua New Guinea, which was as sneaky, and it wasn't a good idea at all. That goes against the Australian grain. Australians have always been previously anyway, from 1870 onwards, pro-national service, but anti-conscription or national service for overseas wars. So the introduction of national service for boys to go over and fucking die in a foreign war that they didn't volunteer to participate in, to the mind of this digger, is fucking horrific. Having said that, like Joshua just pointed out in the chat, a lot of people volunteered for Vietnam. There's a guy that lives in my town here, actually, a small town. He's a Kiwi. And because he wasn't 21, the Kiwis wouldn't actually let him enlist to go and fight in Vietnam. So he used his last nickels and dimes, his last few dollars, bought a ticket over to Australia, landed in Australia, went to the recruiting office, signed up, went to basic training, went to School of Infantry, and deployed to Vietnam because that was his sense of service was so strong, and that actually happened a lot as well in Australia. Something else is not talked about. A lot of people volunteered. Vietnam War started; they volunteered. But yeah, the conscription thing, having a little fucking wooden ball with your birth date up. Oh yeah, now you've been chosen by ballot. That's bullshit. You don't fucking do that. Home service, yes. To actually go where you can die, no fucking way. So I can understand very, very much that side of the anti-Vietnam rhetoric both back then and today. That's horrific. You don't fucking do that. You don't conscript people for a foreign war. That is common in places like Britain and France and America. That's part of the whole deal with democracy. It's like, okay, you can hire and fire your government, but in return, we can conscript you, we can draft you for whatever we need you to do. That's the whole fucking idea of the contract. In Australia, that has not been the case ever. Fucking ever. Also, first televised war. Now, war should not be a spectator sport. Most people can't handle it, and especially back then, before all the violent video games and shit. So when people were seeing blood and the effects of napalm, and you had that little chick running down, that little girl who'd been napalm running naked down the road and shit, that hit people hard. But not to mention as well, by that time the media was so far left, the media was already bloody commie as well, so they would use anything possible to pursue their agenda. And obviously very, very pro-communist. So, but yeah, televising it was always a bad idea, and journalists used to have responsibilities when they covered war, like Chester Wilmot in World War II, Damien Parra, etc. You had responsibilities, and you weren't after shock value or anything like that. You were trying to accurately report and to praise and to support the troops that you were reporting for, and they used to be very well respected. Vietnam onwards, the soldier hates the fucking journalist. They see him as a prostitute, a lying piece of shit, and that is something that has not changed ever since. The biggest enemy of a soldier is a journalist or a politician. But it shouldn't have been televised. It should have never been fucking put on television. And it was a horrifically bad war. It was a very, very bad war. And with new weapons that were fucking horrific, and it should never have been televised. I'm sure in World War II, if you televised what happened in Dresden, or if you televised when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that would have turned so many people off. Their support for the war would have vaporized overnight because the West has no fucking spine and hasn't for a long time. And with Tet and My Lai, this is very calculated. So Ho Chi Minh, I believe, by the time the Tet offensive was actually dead. I'll have to double check that. I think he was actually dead, and a new guy took over. And it was very, very well calculated. Attack on this holiday, shock the world, and use the political advantage to the utmost of your ability. And they understood this political one. Like Giap ended up saying to a foreign journalist, you can kill 10 men of mine for every one I kill of yours, and at those odds, I will still win. You will lose and I will win. And he understood that, and he understood that, Americans, Australians, New Zealanders didn't have the fucking spine to actually see this thing through. And also the subversion. So, they were in contact with communist elements within Australia, New Zealand, and America. And to the point where you had Australians, New Zealand, and American public sending the fucking NVA and the Viet Cong money to support them against their own countrymen that were fighting them. That's how bad it had gotten at this stage. And it'd be like with Afghanistan and Iraq, sending the money direct to Al-Qaeda, to the Taliban, to ISIS, etc. It's the same kind of thing. This is how far it had sunk by then, and this was the seeds of our collapse. So they understood it very, very well, and it worked very, very well. And this is where you started to see from Tet onwards, this is where you saw a big, big flip. And obviously the media jumped on the bandwagon. Everyone's watching media, reading print media, and watching television, etc., listening to radio, and even a lot of conservatives, conservatives, etc., started to turn against it. And this is where you started seeing soldiers being treated very, very badly by the far left, by these little uni student and union dick sucks, getting spat on, getting red paint thrown over them, eggs thrown at them, all that kind of shit when they got back. And this is where you started with you're having mass protests under Jim Cairns. He was a big leader of the moratoriums, etc., in Australia. And this is where the withdrawal policy started. So when Whitlam got into power, he promised, he was the Labor leader, and he promised, and Labor was very heavily communist influenced, always has been, always will be, even up to including this day. So Whitlam promised to withdraw from Vietnam, which that started to happen. Now, contrary to the lies that the boomers in education and that have taught us, South Vietnam, again, they wanted independence. They did not want to join the North. It wasn't a war of reunification or unification or any of that shit. It wasn't two Vietnams that wanted to come together, but imperialist Western fucking stopped it from happening. The South Vietnamese, as evidenced by 860,000 fleeing to South Vietnam, as evidenced by what we're going to go into a little bit later, but they didn't want it. They didn't want anything to fucking do with it. This is what's been taught for so fucking long now by the fucking boomers, is that that we're in charge of education, etc., and media. Oh yeah, the Vietnam, it's a good thing that Vietnam ended up uniting. Well, we're going to fucking see how that goes. So this was evidenced by the fact that 1973. So 1973. This is something that most people don't know, including a lot of boomers, because by that time they'd just written off the South Vietnamese completely, wanted nothing to do with it. They supported the North, still sending money to the North. You had Gough Whitlam, who had already fucking had North Vietnamese delegates to Parliament House in Australia while our troops were still on the ground fighting and being killed by the people that these North Vietnamese. The betrayal there is just fucking unimaginable, in all honesty, and it's fucking sickening. Whitlam is an absolute piece of shit, to be honest. But in 1973, North Vietnam, after the bulk of pretty much all US and Australian, etc., forces had gone, outside of some advisory and some Air Force personnel had gone, the North invaded. South Vietnam, with US and Australian air support, but on the ground by themselves. South Vietnam repelled that invasion. 73, the North Vietnam got their asses kicked so fucking badly by the South when they invaded that it took them 2 years to recover. 2 years to replace the men and material and all that kind of shit to be able to do it again. Yeah, like that. Talk about a fucking bloody nose. They lost that many men and that much equipment. It took them 2 years, even with Chinese backing, to be able to do it again. Does that sound like a South Vietnam that wanted to join with the North to you? Nah, that's one of the big fucking fallacies. Anyway, so yeah, after 72, the world abandoned South Vietnam, and in 1975, the North Vietnamese were finally successful. They invaded the South. The South had basically nothing left. They had no more American support, Australian support, no support from the rest of the world. They were left to basically fucking rot. And 75, the North took over, and then Joshua Forbes said there should be one law and no conflict. Joshua Forbes, I'm bleeding out, Lincoln Park. Okay, I'm not entirely sure what you mean there, brother, but okay. But yeah, 1975. So yeah, North invades the South and takes over it, and then you end up with the mass gulags and mass executions and the mass exodus and diaspora, which we're about to get into. So with the aftermath. So the aftermath of the Vietnam conflict up was 1975. It was heard about in Australia. You had, I can't remember, his name escapes me at the moment, but you had a very prominent, I think it was actually Kim Beazley's father, but I'll have to double check, who said, yeah, no, we heard about it on the radio and we celebrated very deeply but quietly. Yeah, because the left is anti-war. Fuck off. There was peace for 2 years. Peace for 2 years after South Vietnam kicked North Vietnam's ass when the North invaded. Peace for 2 years, and then you have the left, the Labor side of it and everything like that, and all the commies and that, celebrating. 2 years later, after 2 years of peace, 2 years later, North invades, shit tons of people die. Insult is heaped on insult. There's more misery and shit coming, and they celebrated. Yeah, it's the opposite of World War II. World War II celebrated the end of World War II, and the diggers were, You know, there was diggers everywhere being fucking lauded and shouted drinks and everything like that. Yeah, the war's over. Well done, digger. Well done, digger. With this one, thanks, boomers. Yeah, celebrated. Hey, yeah. Our brothers and sisters, our Marxist brothers and sisters actually fucking won. And hey, you're one of the baby killers. Fuck you. Like, in all honesty. And Aussie diggers were shamed and spat on. Rejected by family, rejected by friends. There was one dude, he went back, he had a drink with a mate of his, and he was a national serviceman. He got conscripted. It wasn't his fucking choice to go. He's gone back to the pub with a mate that he knew, a civvy mate that he knew, and then sat down for a beer, and then the guy turned around and said, you killed my brothers and sisters over there. You're a piece of shit. And he learned that his mate had joined the Communist Party and had been sending money to the VC and MVA. What a fucking kick in the teeth. There were families didn't want to fucking hear about it or outright rejected these diggers when they came back. RSLs rejected them. You had World War II and Korean veterans telling these Vietnam boys, yours wasn't a war, mate. There was no trenches. You were over there for a fucking year-long holiday, which if you actually know what our boys fucking did over there, and 90% of them actually saw conflict, actually saw combat, 90% of them were on the fucking two-way range as opposed to much lower percentages in previous wars. What the RSLs did was fucking horrific. And you couldn't get a job. If you wanted to get a job, you didn't put down that you were in the fucking army, especially that you weren't in Vietnam. You could not get a fucking job. There was one bloke, and again, his name escapes me, but he's in the book by Paul Ham, Vietnam, the Australian War. I'd highly recommend you read it. And in the 80s, late 80s, nearly 20 years after he'd come back from Vietnam, one of his co-workers, a female, had found out that he was actually a Vietnam veteran. And she's turned around to him, and this is in the late 80s, after I was born, and turned around to him and said, so you were one of the baby killers, were you? Like, what has happened to these guys makes my fucking blood boil. I've sat down, I've got on the piss with these guys, I've fucking cried with these guys, I've fucking laughed with these guys. Despite the generation gap, we're fucking soldiers, and soldiers stick together. And it's horrific. It's so fucking horrific what happened to these guys, and it's fucking unforgivable. And then, but you had this this welcome home parade, and apparently everything's okay now. And people holding signs up. It's about time. The same people that were spitting on these guys, the same people that fucked on everything they did over there. It's horrific. The politicians and the public in Australia fucking betrayed these guys so badly. They should be fucking ashamed. This is a shame that should not fucking ever be lived down and should never fucking happen again. But Australia doesn't fucking learn. Ever. Joshua Fawns, I'm all good with you on that big fuck off. I wasn't saying fuck off to you, brother. I would never fucking say that to you. You know that. Mum works for RSL veterans. Soldier on forever. Yeah, cheers, brother. Agreed. I fully agree with you there. Yeah, I wasn't telling you to fuck off, man. I wouldn't do that. You're my mate. You're my brother. I wouldn't fucking do that. But yeah, and there was no compensation at all. So, you know, when it comes to the Agent Orange, when it came to PTSD, everything like that, no voice, no compensation. Even like, so after Long Tan, the South Vietnamese government wanted to actually give medals to the boys from 6RAR for, you know, basically give them the Vietnamese version of a US presidential citation. Canberra said no. So they were given doles instead and cigar boxes. And it took them fucking decades to get the medals that they were fucking entitled to. That's just one example of many. When they got back, the army fucked them over as well. They got back, basically told, especially the conscripts, and they were fucking told, right, you had 24 hours to get the fuck off the base. If you're still here, you're going to be arrested. And they had the medals that they won mailed to them. No parade. No, normally in the military, when you get given a medal, there's a formal parade, and you get given your medal in front of your compatriots and given a congratulations and attaboy, etc., etc. No, just sent by mail. Australia abandoned these men and women, like the nurses and that worked over there, and the fighting men. They abandoned them, and it's a fucking shame. It's an absolute national disgrace. And yet, it took decades of fighting. Like that shit that they were spraying, hey, it fucked me up. Hey, I've got these fucking rashes. Hey, I've developed fucking cancer. Hey, my kid's born with fucking deformities. That shit you were spraying over there did something really, really badly. Took them fucking decades to actually get any recognition, anything like that. And The whole sad thing about it is the only ones that did their job in the whole fucking thing were the Australian soldiers, or the soldiers in general. But I'm talking more from Australia perspective here. All right, for Australia and Vietnam, the only ones that did their jobs, the only ones that actually did what they were asked to do, what they were told to do, were the soldiers. Everyone else fucking failed, and failed magnificently. From the fucking PM down, from the Governor General down. The only ones that did their fucking job were the soldiers, and they were the ones fucking punished for it. And they were dejected, and they were rejected, and treated like outcasts, and still are to this fucking day. I'd highly recommend, for those of you who haven't heard it, I'd listen to Red Gum I Was Only 19, or Cold Chisel K Sun, and watch the actual videos for both of them. You know, if you haven't heard them, I don't know what fucking rock you're living under, but honestly, watch the fucking videos to them, because it's just, there's so many of them that are fucking necked themselves. There's so fucking many of them. That some of them are still fucking doing, some Vietnam vets. It's horrific. The whole country fucking betrayed them. But another part of the aftermath. So, you know, this whole bullshit trope from again, you know, boomer educators. Oh, it was reunification. The Vietnamese people wanted it. Rah rah. Okay, so why the mass diaspora? Why the mass diaspora from Vietnam? Like, this is the thing. The North were run by communists. The VC, the Viet Cong, many of them, and I haven't actually gone into the atrocities that they committed here, because there's probably fucking little point. But the atrocities that the VC committed against their own people are unfucking speakable. Unfucking speakable. The way that communists wage war is very similar to the way that the Mohammedans wage war. There's no such thing as a civilian. There's no such thing as a non-combatant. Anything from old person down to infant is combatant and are used as such. It's fucking horrific. And anyone who remotely resists, or anyone who's just neutral, gets a machete shoved up their fucking vagina and fucking slashed up to the Adam's apple, or, you know, it's just horrific, absolutely horrific. But many of the Viet Cong weren't actually Marxists. Many of the Viet Cong were simply Vietnamese nationalists, and they saw it like they hated Diem, and they saw him as a French puppet, and they wanted him gone. And then, so after the North took over in 75, they were persecuted. These VC, many of them were persecuted because they weren't Marxist. They were nationalists and not Marxist, and they'd done horrific things, etc. So a lot of the Vietnamese diaspora that came to Australia and other countries were actually VC, who our fucking men were fighting, and we invited them in with open arms. But they were betrayed by the fucking Marxists. If you weren't fucking communists, that's it. You got your shit taken from you. You got exiled. You got killed. You got persecuted, and it was absolutely fucking horrific. So we ended up with this massive diaspora, and that's where you get Cabramatta in Australia from. And the purges in Vietnam were horrific. So basically, what they ended up doing, the North Vietnamese, after they took over in 75, said to the soldiers that had fought for South Vietnam, all right, we've got an amnesty. Pack up some toiletries and pack some clothes and all that kind of stuff. You're just going to go to a re-education camp. It'll only be for about a week, just to, you know, purge your mind of all these imperialist bullshit. Then you'll be free to go home to your families, and we'll all continue as one. We'll heal the wounds. They went to gulags, tortured to death. Many of them didn't see the light of day again for fucking decades. Many of them were just outright killed. Again, another mass democide, just under Ho Chi Minh had happened in the North beforehand. After 75, mass democide in the South as well. And the amount of refugees, we still got fucking refugees from Vietnam trying to get into Australia and other places. It's a fucking shithole. It is still a shithole to this day. It's corrupt as fuck. Communism is fat fuckers at the top, a very small number of fat fuckers at the top, and impoverished, miserable, fucking starving people at the bottom. That's communism to a fucking T. It always goes to oligarchy. The only real redeeming feature about the Vietnam War, or the Second Indochina War, as it's formerly known, or as it's known in Vietnam by the commies, the American War, that 10 years of conflict, or a bit over 10 years of conflict, They're lucky they got people like veterans, Joshua says, because they're an absolute piece of shit dog country. That's true. That's very true, brother. The only really redeeming feature about the conflict is it was run very badly. USA was subverted anyway. It was just a shit sandwich all around. The soldiers got fucked on. The Vietnamese people suffered it fucking horrifically. The only real redeeming feature was that it proved the domino theory correct. It gave enough time for surrounding countries to deal with their own communist insurgencies, which were happening further south and around Vietnam as well. It gave these other countries time to deal with. Obviously, Cambodia was a bit different under Pol Pot and etc. But most of them, it gave them time to actually deal with their own communist insurgencies and avoid going there in the first place. It stopped the fucking fall of the dominoes. That's not my opinion. That is simply how it was. That decade plus of war in Vietnam gave surrounding countries enough time to actually have a look at what the fuck Ho Chi Minh and D.O.T had done, what was going on in Cambodia under Pol Pot later on, and right, fucking, we don't want this. We're crushing these motherfuckers now, and we're not going there. And this is including Thailand. This is including Malaya, which later on became Malaysia. This is including Singapore. This is including Laos. This is including a lot of other people. And it did actually kind of serve that. This is not revisionist. This is not me going, oh, Vietnam, we won Vietnam. No, it was comprehensively fucking lost. But it did actually give time. It gave a bit of space. It gave a bit of a space for these other countries to actually develop and stop this fucking tide that had spread from Moscow to Beijing and then further on. So, look, this is a digger's take, historical take on Vietnam. Again, I would highly recommend Paul Ham, Australia, the Vietnam War is a good starting point. There's great primary and secondary sources in the bibliography. I haven't put this particularly well today. I'm very, very tired. We've done in the last 2 weeks at work, we've done more than we normally would in a month or a month and a half. So we're all pretty fucked, and I'm a bit bush myself. But I've been looking forward to this one. I've been wanting to do it for a very long time, and I really do appreciate all of you tuning in. I cannot tell you how much I really, really do appreciate all of you tuning in, and I hope you've got something out of it. And I just want to finish off by saying two things. One, if anything that I've said here actually pisses you off, fucking read up on it yourself. Research it up yourself. Facts, not fucking feelings. Because in all honesty, if it pisses you off, I don't care. This is why I encourage everybody to read. This is why I encourage people to get onto primary sources. This is why I encourage people to research history. Because when you do that, you tend to be a little bit more prepared for what's coming in the future. They're saying that those who fail to learn from the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it, and those who do are doomed to watch. Is very fucking true, and we're living that again right now. So also I wanted to say again a massive thank you to Dean McRae, the owner of this channel, for letting me broadcast here, and the other members of Resolute, Dear Beltran, etc. And again, a massive, massive thank you to every one of you that have tuned in, that have joined the chats, that have, hold on, we got one more here. Oh, two more. Josie Ingram, no one wins a war, we're all losers. You got a point there, my sister in Christ. Having said that, war is a part of the human condition, unfortunately, and war is just something that happens whether there's a reason to or not. If there's not a reason, then people find a reason. It's just, that goes from the micro to the macro. It's always been the case and always will be. Joshua Fawn, Semper Fi, Diggers for life. Here, Digger, thank you very much. Always faithful as well. The full saying is Semper Fidelis, always faithful. So I want to thank you all massively, and I hope you guys are having a cracker of a Thursday. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. Love you all. God bless you all. And peace out. Stay loose. This is Jesse from Eureka 1901. Out.